Race car for the road is a horrible cliche, normally wheeled out by people like me. But what else can you use to describe what sits behind me? Porsche's new 911 GT3 RS, because it's perhaps the closest thing we've ever driven to a real race car with number plates. I think it's time you check it out. Now, the incredible thing about the car that sits behind me is it is basically 90% new when it comes to the body. So what's happened over the regular GT3 is, well, they've kind of started from scratch and they've used the Turbo S chassis, and that explains why at the back of the car it's around 30mm wider, while at the front it's 20mm wider. Some hilarious things about this car is, firstly, it has the original Turbo and Turbo S air intake there, but that's no longer functional. There's still a small opening there and it exits there. The rest of it is carbon fibre body, and it is radically different to a regular GT3. I mean, they are so different when you part them side to side. So what's changed? Well, the big thing about this concept is underneath the bonnet there is no longer any frunk. There's no boot space, and that's because Porsche RS have decided to adopt the single radiator from the RSR Racer. So you have no luggage space, but I mean, who cares? Because this car has huge aerodynamic potential because it no longer has the two radiators that used to live just in there. So why does it matter? Well, because it has afforded some space in there for some ultra cool active aero elements that basically boost downforce and reduce it on the front wing. There is a lot to geek out about the aero of this car. In fact, it's probably its biggest feature, but if you're not interested, I think you should skip to the track part. Anyway, this vent here vents all the hot air from the engine. It has these really cool boomerang flaps, tumbles the air to the back of the car, comes all the way around here, and normally would flow all the way down there into the airbox. Porsche don't want that to happen, so it has these cool blades here. I mean, every single vein in this car is functional. Oh, why doesn't Porsche want it to happen? Well, they worked out on a hot day they were losing around 20 horsepower because that hot air was being sucked into the engine. Naturally aspirated engines hate hot air. Because Porsche GT could effectively start again with some of the Porsche 911 RS's bodywork, they did. And that explains why these open front and rear wheel arches, which enables just so much air to exit the wheel arches for bigger downforce. I mean, this car is all about the downforce. And they even redesigned the sort of double wishbones and some of the linkages to be more aerodynamically optimized, which alone produces, just from the suspension components, an extra 40 kilos on the front axle. So the downforce on this car is epic. He keeps saying the downforce word, but it is enormous because in total at 200 kilometers per hour, this car produces around 400 kilos. At its maximum top speed, around 806 kilos, which is around 3 times more than a regular GT3. And of course, most of it is because of this enormous, gigantic whale tail of a wing. Now, Porsche, interestingly, started off by just plonking on the wing from a 919 race car. That was their development, and then somebody honed it into this really ridiculous looking wing on the back of this car. But it, again, serves a purpose. But the problem with downforce is it does limit performance on the straights, and Porsche has a solution because they have a DRS system. So you can see just at the back here, it has these really, really cool hydraulic rams that basically pull this twin element of the wing upwards to boost downforce. The same enormous rear wing also acts as a giant air brake with the front elements at speed. So if you're traveling around 200 kilometers per hour, Porsche say you will now brake up to 2.5 meters quicker thanks to its air brake. As ever for a track-focused machine, weight is always the big enemy, and it's no different for the GT3 RS. And that's why fenders, the bonnet, the roof, even the doors, for the first time this says carbon fibre doors, they're all made of lightweight composites, and that has dragged the weight down, but at the same time, new hardware like the big wing, the active aero has added weight back in. But overall, Porsche claim this weighs in at around 1,450 kilos, which is, well, about 15 kilos heavier than the current GT3. Curiously, for a track-bred performance car like the 911 GT3 RS, it's not all about the numbers the engine produces. Now, just to recap, it produces 386 kilowatts and around 465 newton meters of torque. And that translates into a 0 to 100 kilometers per hour time of around 3.2 seconds and a 296 kilometers per hour top speed. Now that's quick by anyone's standard, but it's not class leading, and that's good because it's allowed the aerodynamicists to have just carte blanche to go completely and utterly wild. So here we are, the first moments in Porsche's GT3 RS, and what can I say? Well, it feels just like a regular GT3. It's pretty easy to ease off the line because there's only the option of the 7-speed dual clutch transmission. Now, before we went off, we have made a few adjustments. We've made some adjustments to the diff, so it's going to basically be in a least aggressive setting here because it's a bit damp on track, which is not the sort of thing you want at Silverstone. We've also changed the dampers as well. We've softened off compression, and we've left rebound the same because Silverstone is notoriously bumpy. And I mean, the first thing you just notice is even these conditions, yeah, the grip and traction are, well, something else. Still sounds good too, but it's not mentally quick, and that's for good reason because it really means you just focus on things like apex speed rather than making up all the time on the corners. But again, just like every 911 is just that traction out of corners. You're just flat. And I said it's not that quick, but my God, we're still doing 240 along here right now. You really can feel the weight of this downforce, but God, is it difficult to get used to. It just means you're just a little bit conservative. You have to trust the car a little bit. Now, the car we're driving has the optional Weissach pack that also adds the carbon fibre roll hoop behind me and sheds a load of weight, mainly because it has a lot of carbon fibre parts like the anti-roll bar. I just love these brakes as well. We're actually driving a car with the optional carbon ceramics. And my God, they just stand up to all the abuse. Just as you would expect. But Porsche says it's a similar story for the steel stoppers too, which we need to try earlier. Because most owners use the steel stoppers because, well, if you go into the gravel or something, your carbon ceramic discs are absolutely ruined. And it just means the steel stoppers are slightly cheaper to replace. And I guess the best thing about this car is you can just continue to tailor and optimize it for your own personal driving. I mean, you can make the diff more aggressive for turn-in, you can, fiddle around with the dampers, and I guess if you have like a track app, you can see the fruits of your labor from every lap. The only thing I worry about is this car runs a 50% higher, spring rate, and that's mainly because at maximum speed it's around 800 kilos of downforce pushing down in the middle of this car. It's around 400 at 200 kilometers per hour. And those stiffer springs, well, I'd wonder if that translates into a car that doesn't really work on bumpy Australian roads. But we'll have to save that for another day because, well, right now we're just limited to track. And to be honest, I don't really care because this thing is perfectly at home. So there we have it, our very first experience with the 911 GT3 RS. And it's hard not to be blown away by it. It really is, because this is a car that you can experience levels of downforce that just aren't really available on any other road car. What we like about the car, we like the fact it's still really adjustable. It still feels like a 911. It's not a one-trick pony. Brakes are incredible. The performance, it doesn't lack performance. And the fact it's maybe not as quick on the straights as perhaps some of the sort of McLaren 765 LT is you start focusing on the corners, the important bit to make up time. But there are some concerns, let's say, and the concerns are basically, I'm wondering if this is going to translate into a road car, because I have a fear that the suspension just might be so stiff it's just not suited, which is a shame because previously these cars, well, you could drive them on a canyon road up a mountain pass and enjoy it cross country, but it might not be the case with this one. Porsche says the 911 GT3 RS will arrive in Australia in Q2 of 2023, and when it does, it won't be cheap. It will cost $500,200. But you know what? Considering its breadth of abilities, I think it's pretty much unmatched.